Welcome back to the All About You podcast. And today my guest is Brian Sachetta, and he is a coach and an advocate for mental health and the author of the book, Get Out of Your Head. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Hey Sheila, thanks for having me.
Brian, the first question I have to ask, I've spoken to a lot of coaches whilst doing the podcast. It's very unusual to have a man as a coach. So that's my first question. And looking at your website, it's not your traditional pale colours, calming. It's quite hard hitting your website and your logo. So can we just dive into that to start with?
Yeah, definitely. As you alluded to, right, I think a lot of folks in the space traditionally, whether it's therapists, social workers, folks who do sort more of the communication and kind of live in those roles that are more relationships and things of that nature tend to be a little bit more on the female side because I'm speaking in broad strokes here, but females tend to be a little bit more nurturing than the average guy, right? Who is sometimes charging forward and trying to build a business or something like that. For me, right, like this work has always been deeply personal, and I have experienced my own anxiety, my own depression, and those obviously helped me or me to write my own books and spread my message out there. And as I've done that work, right, I've seen that there's a huge gap in the marketplace where, yes, it's amazing that we have as many people as we do in the psychotherapy and social worker fields, but at the same time, right, like there are lots of men out there that some of them that I've talked to, and also you just kind of get a sense that there are also a lot of men out there that are not raising their hand and not speaking up for the things that they're dealing with. And so as I've walked this path throughout the last, decade and a half or whatever, just saw that gap in the marketplace and said to myself, like, when I was 18 and I was a guy, I felt as though I didn't have the resources. And as I talked to other men in the space, they have echoed that same sentiment over time. And so for me, it's just been an opportunity, right, to say, yeah, I'm going to bring my own brand of mental health to this space and I'm going to do things a little bit differently. It's going to resonate with some people. It's not going to resonate as much with others. And that's okay, but there is a need for it in general. And the reason that I come a little bit with that harder charging, more aggressive vibe is just basically, it's sort of an invitation to say, like, the way that we're doing things currently of, for a lot of guys, right, the fluffy rainbows and unicorns message does not hit home, right? They're like, I want you to meet me at my level. I'm in the gym, I'm doing aggressive things, I'm trying to move forward in my life. How can you meet me at that spot and then help me with my mental health? And also knowing, right, that there's a lot of pain there, there's a lot of difficulty. I'm not trying to sugarcoat that and be like, hey, go look at a rainbow or a unicorn, like, let's meet you at your level, and understand that this stuff is difficult and let's make space for it.
I mean, that is so interesting because we know men and women communicate differently. That's just the way we're made. And for women, I think it's a lot easier if we have issues, whether it's family, whether it's work, whether it's personal. It's okay for girls and women to get together, a coffee, a glass of wine, a slice of cake, cry, laugh, and hopefully we get the support and the help we need. But for guys, it's a little bit different. And I've had a lot of conversations recently with men and surprisingly talking about mental health, not necessarily theirs, but maybe I've got a friend or somebody I know is having issues. They're starting to talk about it. It's very interesting, as you say, not all the traditional coaching out there is going to work for everybody. If you have got issues with depression, anxiety, to find somebody that you feel comfortable with, and I think especially for guys, they may not feel comfortable talking to the typical female coach in this arena. So for me, your image of the tough guy, I think is just absolutely brilliant. And we need more of that. And that is why I wanted you on the podcast, because you are different. And that's what we need.
I certainly appreciate that, Sheila. And I think something that comes to mind when you say that, right, is like, and I'm not trying to be overly critical here, but again, like looking for the gaps in the marketplace and trying to fill those, right? Like I've been to therapy over the course of my life. And I think with any field, right, you're going to find that whether it's an accountant, a financial planner, a therapist, whatever, right? In the services industry, there are going to be those who are good at the service and there are going to be those who are not as good at the service. When it comes to psychotherapy and social work, fields where you would go try to get help with your mental health, right? Research shows that a lot of the results in the space come from a select few therapists. It might be the top 10, the top 20%. And one of the challenges in the space as well is like, it's hard to walk that line where it's like, okay, somebody's going through something that's difficult. Do I coddle them? Do I just support them? Do I just nurture them? Or do I try to push the person forward? And when you talk to or listen, there's some of the best therapists have written books and things of that nature. It's like when you listen to those best therapists, they will tell you like, it breaks my heart to not be able to coddle this person, to not be able to nurture this person. But I know that if I don't push them and actually do this difficult work, they're not going to get anywhere, as in the patient is not going to, right? And so in some ways, that's sort of the approach that I'm trying to bring to things, which again is polarizing, right? Not everybody is going to like that. But if you're going to a therapist and all they're saying is, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. I hope you're doing okay, right? You're never actually breaking ground and getting to those really difficult moments and questions and thinking about the problems that you really need to solve in your life. It's not poorly intentioned, but as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so if all you're doing is staying with those good intentions, the patient, typically doesn't actually get anywhere.
You've written this book called Get Out of Your Head. A play on words, Brian. I want to get into your head about your book. What made you write this book? And can you tell us about the writing process?
Yeah, that would be kind of fun, actually. I don't think about it all the time, but so what made me write this book? I have always struggled with anxiety, or at least like it was real bad for a long time, where I essentially say like I struggled really hard with it for a decade. And that was somewhere between, the ages of 17, 18 and 27, 28. And along that struggle, right, I always had, as most people hopefully do, right, is like if you're going through a lot of anxiety, I would hope that most folks say to themselves, yeah, this is really painful, but like I want to try to resolve it because I want to live a better life, or I just want to suffer less. So that was the same for me, where from an early age, 17, 18, as I'm facing panic attacks and anxiety, I'm like, this is no way to live. And I don't know what the solution is, but I need to find that solution because I don't want to live like this forever. To make the story cleaner, right? I usually say there was about this decade-long period where what I did was I immersed myself in psychotherapy literature. I went to therapy itself. I tried all these different tactics that I learned from my adventures. And then I sort of curated things to say, okay, for example, I'm going to a job interview and I'm really nervous. I have horrible anxiety about it. Let me try out 3 of the tactics that I learned about recently in my readings or in therapy or whatever. And as I tried those things out, I began to find what worked for me and what didn't work as well for me. And then I started chronicling those things in my blogs and in my book. And so the first book itself is essentially me saying, all right, from a holistic standpoint, how do we mitigate anxiety? And then when it comes to the tactical of like, what does the book look like? The first half is more focused on, okay, you are in the moment of anxiety or you are right about there. The anxiety has already revved up and you need to dial that fear back. How do you do that? And the second half of the book is more, we want to be in fewer instances in our life where anxiety comes up, right? So how do we get into fewer of those situations in the first place? So in the end, the book is basically live a lifestyle that produces less anxiety. And then also when that anxiety is produced, find ways to get out of it faster.
So really what you're saying is exploring all the different options, but then almost like creating a toolkit that works for you. That, okay, I know I've got this situation coming out. In my toolkit, I have this and this, which will work for this situation. But when I'm in another situation that's making me feel uncomfortable, I've got a different tool for that. So you're building up your repertoire of things, because every situation is different. I mean, a job interview is different to going to a party, as in giving a work presentation, or just standing up and asking someone a question at a meeting. You've got all these different sort of scenarios, and they don't all have the same quick fix, what's going to work for you.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And you used a word that is it's just funny that you say it, because when you look at the subtitle of that first book, so it's Get Out of Your Head, a toolkit for living with and overcoming anxiety. And so when you said toolkit, I was like, yeah, that's exactly right. That's how the book goes.
Are your clients generally 50-50 split?
It does skew more male, which I think is probably a product of the brand identity, if that makes sense.
But I love that. That's the answer I was hoping you were going to say, because when you look at your website, I'm a bit, whoa, okay, this is a bit in your face, the colors, the images. It's not your typical, and I'm not disregarding this at all, but as you say, it's not your typical steaming hot cup of coffee, blanket, hug. I can see your logo in the background here. It's in your face, it's quite hard, it's quite masculine. I can see how a man would look at this and go, oh, this is a bit different to the coffee fluffy that I'm used to. So that was intentional.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I did this exercise with one of my friends who's a talented designer, and he was like, "Well, I read your first book, and this is the vibe that I got." So we ended up changing the cover, and it was the first version of the cover was actually somewhat in your face as well. The difference was, or kind of where we made a decision was, I had a book cover. I didn't necessarily have a brand identity. So when it came to, hey, maybe I write another book, maybe I launch a coaching practice, or I have a website, what identity can I put on there? Or I guess basically, if you just take the first book cover and try to turn that into a brand, it didn't go that well, right? So in it was sort of in retrospect, right? My first book was already out. My designer, I sat down with him and I was like, I want to come up with this full brand identity. Can you read the book? And then from there, we can figure out like the messaging is already in the book, as in we now need to go design for the content that is already there. And so that in your face approach, he found that in the writing itself. And then so it just made for a better alignment to be like, oh, okay, now the book cover and therefore the brand identity align with the messaging and align with Brian's overall philosophy in the space.
So, Brian, now we've talked about the logo and the book cover, let's open this book. We are talking about people having issues with anxiety. Can we go underneath the bonnet? When I think of anxiety, I think of somebody nervous, somebody feels unsure. Maybe they've got a work presentation coming up. Maybe it's a social party. Anxiety. What is it people are feeling? Are they feeling, oh my God, I'm going to walk into a room and I don't know anyone and I won't know what to say. I'm a boring person. I've got nothing interesting to say. What are some of the things that are making people anxious?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think what we want to do is we want to start with the definition itself, and then we can get into more concrete applications of it. So when I talk about anxiety, I usually say that it is future-oriented fear, right? Or another way of saying that is it's the feeling of fear without the immediate threat in front of you. So we know that feeling of fear, right? Like if we're in a haunted house and we're like, hey, the threat is right there. Some actor is going to jump out and scare me. I am therefore afraid. Whereas anxiety is the feeling as though something bad is going to happen, even if that threat is not in front of me right now, right? So it's the fear of being inside of that haunted house a day from now, a week from now, a month from now. So when we start with that emotion, we can then figure out what some of the applications are. And the reason that I think it's helpful to start with the broad emotion is because that's the common thread for every person. Whereas when we go into the specific applications, those are going to vary quite widely, right? So for somebody specifically with social anxiety, their fear is going to be centered around things that can happen in their relationships, right? So that might be, hey, I'm going to a party. Yeah, I'm afraid that I'm going to trip and everybody's going to laugh at me as I'm on the ground. Or I'm going to start talking to somebody and I'm not going to know what to say. I'm going to clam up and make a fool out of myself, or I'm going to give a public speech and I'm going to pee my pants on stage, and again everybody is going to laugh at me, right? There are lots of other forms of anxiety. You may have a fear of flying, right, which could be diagnosed as aerophobia, and for that, right, somebody who is getting on an airplane or is traveling in the near future, their brain is going to start looping and being like, oh man, that flight's in a week. I'm so nervous about that. What if we hit turbulence? What if we don't make it? What if all these bad things happen? So again, it's that feeling of future-oriented fear applied to specific things that that person generally is afraid of.
I have to say, when you said future orientated fear, I've written that down because it's true, isn't it? We are worrying about things happening in the future, and we're literally creating this scenario in the worst possible way. We're not thinking, oh my God, I might meet someone really interesting at this party. I might have a really nice time. There might be amazing food and drink. I might meet the man or woman of my dreams. We don't. We just catastrophize and we think, oh my God, I'm going to look a complete wally, etc., etc. That is brilliant. I've written that down. I love that.
Very nice. And I would say, right, it's frustrating when anybody goes through this. They're like, why can't I focus on those positive things, or why do I not, right? And a lot of it comes back to evolutionary psychology and the innate negativity bias in the brain, which is to say that our brains are predisposed to look out for the negative before we look out for the positive. Because if you go all the way back into human history and you're like, okay, why does the nervous system get wired to look out for threats? It's essentially trying to keep us out of harm's way. And if we are looking around and saying, hey, rustle in the bushes, that could be a tiger, it could also be nothing, but it could be a tiger. It's more advantageous to say it could be a tiger and then it becomes nothing than it is nothing and it becomes a tiger and all of a sudden we're dead, right? So there are these little truths that you have to sometimes integrate into your repertoire and just understand, right? So then you can give yourself a little bit more grace and you can say, oh, okay, I'm going to that party. My brain is doing that thing again where it's making me focus on all the negative outcomes. And I get it, and it's frustrating, but you know what? That's just kind of how things go sometimes. No big deal. And once you make that determination in your mind, you can often diffuse the anxiety a little bit, right? Rather than saying, oh, my brain's doing that thing again. It's so frustrating and it's so annoying. And going further into that loop, you say, whatever, no big deal. And you diffuse it and you kind of let the anxiety just live there and sit there and then eventually pass.
I mean, I think there are so many different sort of levels of anxiety. You are dealing with people who have come to you for professional help because it's maybe affecting their personal life, their work life. I think we all literally every single day have a certain degree of anxiety. Am I going to be late for work? Is there going to be a queue at the petrol station? All these little things just make our heart beat a little bit more. Okay, these are like little daily annoyances. For example, going to the dentist. This is a big one. I've had lots of conversations about this lately. Nobody likes going to the dentist. And we all catastrophize to the end of the earth on this. 9 times out of 10, we come out and go, okay, I'd rather have been doing something else, but I've survived it. I'm in one piece. I can move on with my life. And we think, why did I spend all that mental and physical energy? Because the thing is with anxiety, it's not just in the mind, it's the physical as well. Times when I've got anxious over something, you feel exhausted. And if people are dealing with this on a daily basis, the mental exhaustion, the physical exhaustion, it's not going to take long before you're in real trouble.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. There's a lot of segues that I could make here. I'm trying to think of the best one, but a couple that come to mind. So I guess we'll start with this one, right? Is essentially, even though those bad things can happen, sort of as you alluded to, those bad things can happen, and that's why our brain goes into that prediction mode, right? To say, okay, I almost have to guard against me being at the dentist and something bad happening, right? At the same time, that prediction often runs amok where we predict things that are maybe not far worse, but 99 times out of 100, like you said, worse than even a bad case, right? And so sometimes it can be helpful to actually think about the reality of what that negative thing could be rather than fully resisting it and detaching from it and letting that anxiety eat away at us. And what I mean by that is, right, if you're going to the dentist and you have a lot of anxiety, like ground that anxiety and be like, is my brain really thinking that like all my teeth are going to fall out of my mouth and the dentist is going to carve me up and it's going to be this horrific experience? Or am I actually worried that I'm going to have a cavity and I'm going to have to get drilled for that and I'm going to have to pay some money and then sit with that and be like, you know what? There is a pretty good likelihood that if that comes to fruition, that is not as bad as what is playing out in my mind right now. And that can be helpful. The second thing that I think is also helpful is remembering that, you know, the anxiety, it does live in the future, right? So the more that you're able to tap back into the present moment and connect to what you're doing in this moment, the less that anxiety is going to affect you. So if you have that dentist appointment and you're like, oh, I'm so nervous and I'm worried that bad things are going to happen and whatnot, look, those possibilities still exist. I can't write them off for you. At the same time, right? Like you had mentioned how we kind of waste all that energy and become exhausted. And so if that dentist appointment is a week away, one of the things that we can do, it's, you know, it's a bit simplistic, but is just remind ourselves to come back to the present moment and focus on what it is that we're doing, right? And saying, okay, am I at the dentist office right now or am I on a work call? Am I at the dentist office right now or am I at the grocery store, right? Let me focus on what is happening right here and right now, because those projections of the dentist office, yes, maybe, you know, they're definitely scary and maybe they might come to fruition, but they're not guaranteed realities. Whereas me, being in the supermarket right now, that is reality and that is what I have to deal with. And so not only coming back to the present moment in those fashions, but then also tapping in real concrete ways, right? Grounding exercises, for example, you know, putting your feet on the floor, feeling that connection of your feet to the floor, or going for a run, going for a walk, doing something that legitimately gets you out of your head back into the present moment and away from that dentist appointment. The more that you do that as that appointment arrives, the more present you stay, the less anxious you feel, and then the better you feel when you get to that appointment, right? And the cherry on top here is a lot of the times we spend countless hours catastrophizing over the dentist appointment or whatever other scary thing it is that we have going on. And sometimes, right, we finally get to that moment, we sort of like black out in a way, right? Like the emotions just overtake us and we're not really totally fully understanding what's going on. We just go through the motions or whatever, right? And then we come out on the other side and we're like, oh, the appointment's over and my teeth are fine. And it's one of those moments where you look back and you're like, oh yeah, maybe I did make a big deal out of this. And, you know, maybe it was just my brain doing its protective thing. But that reminder is telling you, and it tells us in general, that, you know, moving forward, maybe it makes sense to just let things happen, stay in that present moment, come out on the other side and be like, you know what? Hey, maybe it wasn't as bad as I made it out to be for the week leading up to it.
I love that. And I think that advice, as in, if it's a week away, focus on what you're doing now. Where are you? What are you doing? How do you feel? The feet on the ground. I love that. One thing I wanted to say, Brian, your book is called Get Out of Your Head. What should we be putting in our head? Instead of all this anxiety, what are some of the things when we feel that, oh my God, I can feel myself, you sort of, my mind's running away with itself, my thoughts are escalating. What could we be putting inside our mind to try and just calm that all down?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to say because different things work for different people. This is sort of an anti answer, if you will. A lot of people would say that you should do positive visualization and be like, I'm at the dentist's office. I don't have any cavities. I'm doing great. And one of the problems with that is if you don't actually believe that full heartedly, your brain is going to push back against that and it's going to be like, I don't know, man, like we're anxious right now because we don't necessarily believe that everything is going to go swimmingly. And so that then creates or perpetuates a lot of that anxiety. So people may say that what we should put in our heads is positive visualization. And what I would say is if that works for you and truly does work, if that calms you down, that's great. You should do that. But a word of caution is that for a lot of folks with anxiety, and I know that I've struggled with this as well, that doesn't always work. In fact, it often makes things worse. So instead, what you might want to do, right, is again, going back to those grounding exercises, rather than trying to necessarily put something in your head, just try to live back inside your body, live back inside of the present moment in front of you. Because it's funny, right? Is like when you think about the times that you were most joyous, most present, most connected, happiest, whatever, you don't actually think a lot. You just do things. You know what I mean? Right? You come home from a party and a week later, or even the night after that, you may say, wow, that was such a great party. I had such a good time. And if you think about it, it's not like you sat there and you were like, okay, well, I'm going to go dance over here and then I'm going to go get a drink. You just do things, right? You're just very present. You're very connected and you have a good time. You just flow. And so sometimes, right, rather than putting something in our heads, we have to find a way to get out of our heads and find that flow state, which can often be found or discovered through something that's a little bit engaging, something that's a little bit challenging, something that captures our attention in a good way, right? So again, a bit of an anti-answer, but you want to think not in terms of what do you put in your head, but what do you do to prevent yourself from getting back in there?
I mean, that is another thing for the toolkit because I was thinking that while you were talking then, if you are worried about an exam coming up, a presentation, and it's just all swirling around in your mind and you just can't get rid of it, sitting down and doing something like a jigsaw, colouring, something like that, where you've got to focus on what you're doing, a Sudoku puzzle, a crossword, anything where you can't think of crossword answers while all this is going on in your brain. You can't look at the patterns, the piece of sky, the colour of the bird's wings while this is all going on in your mind. So I think that is brilliant. I love that.
Thank you. And yeah, just one last example to put a pin in it, right? Is if you have a bunch of donuts or candy in your house and you say to yourself, I got to make sure I don't eat these donuts, right? You don't sit in front of the donuts and say, okay, here I am not eating them, right? You throw them away and then you replace them with something else to eat. Because if you don't have anything else to eat, you're going to get hungry and then you're going to be like, where are the donuts, right? So it's all about giving ourselves an alternative path and one that is more accessible.
You have given us so many tools to cope with what I call sort of daily levels of anxiety. So just before we finish, Brian, any last words of wisdom, anything else you want to say about the book?
I think just like from a very broad level, right? Because we've talked about some of the in the moment stuff. Very broad level is the idea of not always trying to resist the anxiety and the negative feelings. And I know that's really difficult. There are a lot of people in this space who would say, oh, you got to almost have this mindset of bring it on. I can take on as much anxiety as possible. I'm not afraid of it. And once again, that kind of comes back to that idea we talked about a minute ago, where it's like, if you're doing positive visualization, but you don't believe it, it's going to backfire. So if you're sitting there saying, come on, anxiety, I can take more of you, that is also going to work against you, So instead of doing something like that, right, the nuance there would be saying, okay, sit down with the anxiety and say, look, look, this is actually really painful and difficult, and I don't necessarily want to deal with it, but I can sit in it and I can just let it pass through me without having as strong of a reaction. And when you don't have that reaction, often what happens is the anxiety eventually passes through, right? It might take a little while, it might be uncomfortable, but getting yourself to a place of that heightened comfortability, that's ultimately where you want to get to, because let's be real, life is difficult. There's a lot of challenges. You're never going to get to a place in life where you have zero anxiety all the time. Like you said, Sheila, right? It's like we have little anxieties, whether it's thinking that, there's going to be a line at the gas station or whatever. The real trick, the real cracking of the code is saying, how do I live with these anxieties in a healthy way?
Brian, that's been a fantastic conversation. Lots of words of wisdom there. Brian, I just want to wish you good luck with that book. I mean, get out of your head. I think that is absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you, Sheila. Great talking to you. And I hope folks can take something away from it.
Oh, there's plenty for them to take from this conversation. So I do hope you enjoyed my conversation with Brian. I think it was absolutely brilliant. And I'm so happy that men are finally getting the help they need with levels of anxiety and depression. So thank you for listening. And please subscribe for future episodes on whatever platform you are listening on. And please do share this podcast, particularly with the men in your life. And if you have a story to tell, please contact me on allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com and let's tell your story.